The first week up there was the easiest. The silence was a friend, a good one. My only job was to stare out into an endless sea of green, the only person for miles. They told me the solitude would be the hardest part. They were wrong. It wasn't the loneliness that broke me. It was the silence right after it started screaming back. My name is Thomas. I spent one season as a fire lookout at Thornwood Peak. They hire you to watch for smoke, but they don't warn you about what's watching you from the trees. They don't tell you some places are quiet for a damn good reason, and they sure as hell don't tell you that when you stare into the abyss long enough, something stares back. This isn't some story about being a hero. This is a story about what happens when your last connection to the real world frays and snaps 100 feet in the air, with no one around for 50 miles to hear it. I took the job for the same reason most guys do. I was running. For me, it was from the ghost of my wife, Sarah. Her absence back in the city was this roaring vacuum, a hole in the world that sucked all the noise and color out of my life. Every street corner, every damn coffee shop held a memory just waiting to jump me. I figured trading the noise of grief for the quiet of the wilderness was a good deal. I thought solitude would fix me. The drive up the mountain was the first step. The pavement turned to gravel. The gravel turned to a dirt track that was really just two ruts in the ground. My old truck groaned the whole way up the switchbacks, climbing until the world I knew was just a hazy smear below. And then the road just ended. A small clearing, and there it was. The tower. It was an old aeromotor model, just a skeleton of steel reaching 100 feet into the sky, with a tiny 14 by 14 foot cabin sitting on top like a forgotten bird's nest. It looked like a stupid, fragile thing to build in the face of all that ancient wilderness. My predecessor, a grizzled old guy named Al, was there to hand off the keys. His face was a roadmap of a hard life, and his eyes were squinted up like he'd been staring into the sun for a decade straight. "She's all yours," he grunted, jerking a tobacco-stained thumb at the tower. "Moans a bit when the wind kicks up, but she's sturdy." He gave me the nickel tour of the cabin. One Spartan room, glass on all four sides. It had a bed, a little stove, a desk, and the heart of the whole operation, the Osborne firefinder. A beautiful old thing made of brass and steel, a round map of my whole world under a sighting scope. Al explained my duties like he was reading from a script he'd recited 1,000 times. "Wake up at 0700, take your weather, temp, humidity, wind, fuel moisture. Radio it in, log it. Then you watch. Scan 360 degrees every 15 minutes. See smoke? You pinpoint it with the finder, get the azimuth, radio it in. Log everything. And I mean everything. That book," he pointed to a thick leather-bound ledger on the desk, "that's your only friend up here. Don't neglect it." The supply chopper, he said, came once a month. Until then, I was on my own. As he got ready to leave, he paused at the trapdoor that led down the dizzying stairs. He looked at me, really looked at me for the first time. "One more thing," he said, his voice dropping. "The woods. They play tricks. You'll hear things, see stuff out of the corner of your eye. It's just the wind in the pines, a deer. Don't let your imagination get away from you. This place can chew a man up if he lets it." With that, he was gone, and the silence he left behind was total. For the first few weeks, it was heaven. The routine Al laid out became my religion, a set of small rituals that kept me grounded. Wake, weather, radio, log, scan, repeat. The work was simple, almost meditative. My world shrank to the 40-kilometer circle of trees I was responsible for. I got to know my kingdom, giving names to the distant peaks, the sleeping giant, the widow's peak, the jagged spine. The silence I'd wanted so badly was a real, physical thing. It was deep, broken only by the whisper of the wind, the caw of a raven, or the howl of a distant coyote pack at sunset. It was a clean silence, not the hollow quiet of my apartment. This silence was full. It was alive. I could feel the grief starting to loosen its grip, its sharp edges, worn down by the sheer scale of everything. I'd spend my evenings reading, sketching, or just sitting on the catwalk circling the cabin, watching the sun paint the sky with impossible colors. I felt okay. I wrote in the official logbook with neat, steady handwriting. Log entry, day 14, weather clear, visibility 50 miles. Wind west-southwest at 5 knots, no smokes, all quiet. The quiet is good. Feels like the world is holding its breath. For the first time in a year, I feel like I can breathe too. I was an idiot. I thought the silence was a gift. I didn't get it. It was just an empty space, waiting for something to fill it. The change, when it came, was small. So small you could miss it. It started around the beginning of my second month, long after the magic had worn off, and the deep, heavy isolation had settled in for good. It began with little things, tiny little inconsistencies that picked at the edges of my routine. I'd leave my thermos on the west side of the firefinder, turn around after a scan, and it'd be on the east side. I just chalked it up to being forgetful. My mind was still adjusting, I told myself. Then came the sounds. The tower, just like Al said, groaned and creaked with the wind. I'd gotten used to its voice, but new sounds started to work their way in. A soft tapping, rhythmic, like a fingernail on the window pane. I'd freeze, listen, and it would be gone. Just the wind. Must be a loose cable, I thought, or a bird. It had to be. One afternoon I was doing my scan. The forest was dead still, baking in the sun. As I swept the binoculars across a far-off ridge, I caught a flicker of movement. Not an animal. It was too tall, too straight up and down. It looked like a person. I held the binoculars steady, my heart suddenly hammering. I twisted the focus knob, but there was nothing there. Just a knot of old pine trees and their shadows. A trick of the light, a heat shimmer. I wrote it off, but a little seed of unease had been planted. Log entry, day 38. Overcast, humid. Saw something odd. Thought it was a man on Razorback Ridge. Gone when I looked back. Must be a hiker, but the maps show that whole area is inaccessible. Or maybe I'm just tired. Probably just tired. Things started happening more often. My spare radio battery, which I kept charged like my life depended on it, was dead one morning. I found one of my books, a collection of Sarah's favorite poems, open on the floor, pages fluttering like there was a breeze, but all the windows were sealed tight. Each thing on its own was small enough to ignore, but together they started painting a picture I didn't want to see. The radio was my lifeline and my tormentor. The twice-daily check-ins with dispatch were my only link to a world that felt a million miles away. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I'd wake up to a sudden burst of static. I'd lie there in the dark, stiff as a board, just listening. And sometimes, buried in that hiss and crackle, I thought I could hear whispering, garbled words too low to make out, like a conversation happening just beyond a wall. When I'd call dispatch to ask, the answer was always the same. Negative, Thornwood. Radio's been quiet. You getting enough sleep up there, son? Sleep was becoming a memory. The nights were the worst. The darkness outside the windows was a solid thing, a black wall pressing in on my little glass box. Every creak of the tower, every rustle from the forest floor 100 feet down, sounded 10 times louder and 10 times more threatening. The nightmares started. Not about Sarah anymore. They were about the forest. A forest made of twisting, grasping arms, of eyeless things moving between the trunks. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, with the phantom feeling of being watched still crawling on my skin. One evening, I was out on the catwalk, trying to get a grip as the sun went down. I was looking east towards Orfordness Ridge, some dead surveyor's idea of a joke. In the growing dark, I saw a light, a single pulsing red light, deep in the woods, where no light had any business being. It wasn't a campfire, it was a steady, mechanical pulse. I grabbed my binoculars, my hands shaking so bad I could barely focus. The light pulsed, on, off, for a minute straight, and then just went out. The forest was black again. I fumbled for the radio. "Dispatch, this is Thornwood." "Go ahead, Thornwood." "Dispatch, I just saw a light, a red pulsing light east of me, bearing about 95 degrees, somewhere on Orfordness." There was a pause. "Thornwood, there's nothing out on Orfordness. No trails, no roads. You sure it wasn't a reflection? A plane?" "Negative, dispatch. This was low, in the trees. It was still, then it just vanished." Another pause, longer this time. "All right, Thornwood, log it. We'll keep an eye on it. Get some rest, son." I logged it, my hand trembling, but the logbook didn't feel like a friend anymore. It felt like a medical chart of my own unraveling. The professional language seemed like a lie, a thin coat of paint over a growing pit of fear. The silence that came after that call was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, waiting. It was the silence of a predator, holding perfectly still, watching you. The red light was the turning point. After that, all the plausible excuses I'd been telling myself started to fall apart. The little explainable quirks gave way to things that were flat out impossible. The forest wasn't just a place anymore. It felt hostile, and the solitude I'd craved was no longer a cure. It was poison. My days became a blur of hypervigilance. I scanned the woods not for smoke, but for movement. The binoculars were glued to my face, my eyes burning. And that's when I started seeing him. I called him the Watcher. He was always on the edge of my sight, a tall, impossibly thin figure standing among the trees. He never moved. He just stood there, a dark slash in the landscape that didn't belong. The first time I saw him clearly, he was at the base of the tower, half hidden by some firs. I almost dropped my coffee. I just stared, frozen, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. He was a motionless, faceless smudge of darkness in the shape of a man. I blinked and he was gone. I spent the next hour scanning that same spot, holding my breath, but there was nothing. The forest had just swallowed him. He started showing up more often, sometimes miles away, a silhouette on a ridge. Other times he'd be closer, right at the edge of the clearing, which made my 100-foot tower feel like a cage. Every time was the same. I'd see him. A bolt of pure ice-cold terror would shoot through me, and the second I tried to get a clear look, he'd vanish, leaving me wondering if I was losing my mind. Was this what Al meant? Was the loneliness finally making me see things? My log entries became a secret, frantic conversation with myself. My official log stayed professional and sparse, a total lie. But I started a second book, a cheap spiral notebook. Private log, day 62. Saw him again, closer, at the tree line. He's so thin, like a shadow stretched out too far. I don't think he has a face. I yelled at him today. My voice sounded pathetic, swallowed by the woods. He didn't even move, just stood there. Then he dissolved. Not ran, dissolved, like smoke in the wind. Am I going crazy? Private log, day 65. I haven't really slept in days. I close my eyes and I see his shape burned onto the back of my eyelids. The wind, sometimes it sounds like it's whispering my name. Sarah, it whispers her name. I know it's not real. It's the grief, the isolation. But God, it feels so real. The silence in here isn't empty anymore. It's a presence, and it's listening. The routine that once saved me was now just torture. The 15-minute scans weren't for fires. They were a desperate check to confirm I was still alone, even though I felt watched every second of the day. The radio crackled with whispers that weren't there. The groans of the tower sounded like footsteps on the stairs. I started talking to myself constantly, just to fill the crushing quiet. Okay, Tom, weather reading. Anemometer says 10 knots. Good. Now we write it down, see? Simple. Normal. One afternoon, a storm rolled in. The sky turned a bruised, angry purple, and the wind howled, shaking the tower so hard the water in my glass slopped onto the floor. Rain hammered the windows, turning the world into a rushing grey blur. And then the lightning started, blinding flashes that lit up the forest in stark, frozen moments. Flash. A sea of writhing trees. Flash. The world, bleached and dead. Flash. He was there, on the catwalk, right outside my window. I screamed, scrambling backwards so fast I fell over my chair. He was inches away, separated from me by a single pane of glass. He was just as I'd seen him from far away, tall, gaunt, in dark, ragged clothes. But now I could see he had a face, or the suggestion of one. A smooth, pale oval with shallow dents where eyes and a mouth should be. A blank canvas of pure horror. As the lightning flashed again, he raised one long, spindly hand and pressed it to the glass. The glass didn't fog. It was like he had no heat, no life in him at all. I fumbled for the flare gun, the only weapon I had. My hands were slick with sweat. I aimed it at the figure, my whole body shaking. "Get away from me!" I shrieked, my voice cracking. The thing didn't move. The blank face seemed to look right through me. Another flash of lightning lit up the cabin. In that split second, I saw his reflection in the glass, and behind him, mine. My face, twisted in a mask of pure terror. But in the reflection, his blank face wasn't blank anymore. It was mine. My own terrified eyes, my own screaming mouth were plastered over that smooth, featureless head. The next flash came. He was gone. The catwalk was empty. I don't remember the rest of the storm. I think I crawled under the desk and stayed there until the rain stopped. When I finally came out, my mind numb, I checked the catwalk. No footprints, no smudges on the glass. Nothing. That's when the silence started to scream. It wasn't a real sound. It was a pressure, a high-pitched whine inside my skull that drowned out everything else. It was the sound of my own mind tearing itself apart, each snap an explosion in the quiet. The silence was screaming that I was alone, that I was crazy, and that something was out there feeding on it. After the storm, the wall between my head and the world outside just dissolved. Time turned into a thick, slow-moving sludge. My private notebook filled, with scrawls I could barely read, drawings of the faceless man and broken sentences. I gave up on the official log. Dispatch would call for my morning report, and I'd just sit there, staring at the radio, the screaming in my head too loud to let their voices in. After a few days, they stopped calling. Maybe they figured the radio was busted, or maybe they knew. Maybe this wasn't the first time. I sealed myself in. I dragged my cot and the table over the trapdoor, a pointless gesture against something that could just appear on my catwalk. The paranoia was my only companion now. I rationed what was left of my food, convinced that leaving the tower for any reason was a death sentence. The Watcher was always there now. I didn't have to see him. I could feel him, a cold spot in the air, a prickle on my skin that told me his blank face was pointed my way. Sometimes I'd see him move. He didn't walk. He'd just glide between the trees, a flicker of motion my eyes could barely catch. Once, through the binoculars, I saw him standing over a dead deer. He just stood there for an hour, perfectly still, and when he finally faded back into the trees, the deer looked shrunken, drained. My biggest fear was that he would get inside. The end came on what I think was day 81. Night fell, the moon just a sick yellow sliver in the sky. The screaming in my head was a dull, constant roar. I was sitting on the floor with my back to the wall, the flare gun in my lap. That's when I heard it. A sound that wasn't the wind or the tower or my own broken mind. Scrape. From below, on the stairs, my blood turned to ice. Scrape. Drag. Scrape. The sound of something heavy being pulled up the metal steps one by one. It was slow, deliberate. He was coming for me, and he was taking his time. He wanted me to hear it. I crawled to the trapdoor, pressing my ear to the wood. The scraping was louder, closer now. I could hear a low, wet, dragging sound with each scrape. My shattered mind showed me the picture. He was dragging something with him. A body, Sarah's body. The screaming in my head exploded. "No!" I yelled, beating my fists on the trapdoor. "Leave me alone! She's gone! Leave her alone!" The scraping stopped. Silence. That heavy, pregnant silence was back, and it was 1,000 times more terrifying than the noise. He was right outside, right below the floor, waiting. I scrambled away from the door, moving backward until I hit the wall. I raised the flare gun, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold it. My eyes were glued to the barricaded trapdoor. The silence stretched on. 1 minute. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. The only sound was my own ragged breathing, then a single soft tap on the underside of the door. Tap, tap, tap. He was playing with me. I started to cry, deep, broken sobs from a man who'd reached the very end. Through my tears, I heard a new sound, not from the door, from the radio. A crackle of static, and then a voice. Sarah's voice. "Tom, why did you leave me?" It was her voice clear as day, wrapped in static. The last thing she'd ever said to me in the hospital. The guilt I'd run from, the grief I'd tried to bury, was being thrown back in my face. "You're not real," I whispered, rocking back and forth. "You're not real. Let me in, Tom. It's so cold out here." The tapping on the door got louder, more insistent. Thump. 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 "I can't," I screamed. The doorknob on the trapdoor began to turn. A loud metallic click echoed in the cabin. The barricade I'd built groaned as something pushed from below. The cot slid an inch, then another. This was it. I was either about to be killed by whatever this thing was, or my own mind was about to finally, violently break. In that moment, it didn't matter what was real. The terror was the same. The cot scraped further across the floor, the table next to it tipping over with a crash. The edge of the trapdoor lifted, opening a sliver of pure black into my sanctuary. A long, pale hand, like a knot of white roots, snaked through the opening. I didn't think. I just aimed the flare gun and pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening. A brilliant white star erupted in the cabin, flooding the room with painful light and thick, choking smoke. It hit the hand and the door, and for a split second, the world was fire and noise. I heard a shriek, a high, piercing sound of static and agony, and it wasn't mine. I scrambled for the fire extinguisher as the flare set the wood and my bedding on fire. I sprayed the foam wildly, gagging on the smoke, my eyes streaming. The fire hissed and died, leaving a blackened, smoldering wreck where my barricade used to be. The trap door was a charred hole. Through the smoke, I looked down the stairs. There was nothing there, no body, no watcher, just the empty metal staircase spiraling down into the dark. I don't know how long I sat there in the smoky, ruined cabin, just listening to the ringing in my ears. Maybe hours. Eventually, the sun came up. The world outside looked exactly the same. Peaceful, green. It didn't care. I did the only thing I could. I grabbed the empty logbook and a pen. My hands were still shaking, covered in soot and foam. I wrote one last entry, not for dispatch, for whoever came next. Final entry, day unknown. He came. I fought back. Fire's out, but the tower is compromised. The silence is quiet now. Actually quiet. I think I broke it, or it broke me. I have to get down, have to see if the ground is still real. I don't know what's waiting in the woods. Maybe nothing, maybe him, or maybe just me waiting for myself at the bottom. Don't trust the quiet. The quiet lies. I left the book open on the charred floor. I went down the stairs, one shaky step at a time, back into the forest that had been my prison. I don't really remember the walk out. It's just a blur of green and fear. Did I make it back? Am I telling this story to a doctor in a clean white room? Or did I just trade a small cage for a much, much larger one? Sometimes when it gets really quiet, I can still feel it, that pressure in my ears. The beginning of a scream. I guess a part of me never left that tower. It's still up there, scanning the horizon. Forever watching, and forever being watched. If you know that feeling, that deep-seated unease in the quiet that tells you you're not really alone, let me know your story in the comments. And if you want more stories from those quiet places, the ones with teeth, make sure you subscribe, because you never know what might be listening.